Here we are on November the 14th. Welcome to Uncle Bobby's Country Corner, where real men don't play. As a child, I heard to the point of nausea. Time changes everything except car tires and baby diapers. You got to change them yourself. We are currently faced across the country with a number of very difficult challenges. And one of those, I guess, most important challenges, how do we deal with an environment that has created such an imbalance in wealth and living conditions for people across the country? And I have two guests with me today that have more degrees than a thermometer, but they got enough sense to be able to utilize their vast experiences with respect to the subject matter for today, and that is, how do we, as a country, level the playing field when it comes to who eats and who doesn't, who has a living environment that's suitable for people in the richest country in the world. And so without any further ado, to my left is a man who has impeccable credentials within the disciplines of engineering and construction and planning. Welcome to my show, John Bollinger. How you doing, John?
I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much. You know, it occurs to me, you talked about your passion as a child. My passion when I was young enough to go into a profession was to create affordable housing. I came from a family that was lower middle income, you might say, and we were always living in apartments and moving from place to place. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we could build houses for people like us, and affordable houses? And I managed to find my way into a grant and go to the School of Architecture at USC. And that was the beginning of a great career, shall I say. I ended up getting a doctorate in architecture because of, again, my passion. I was seeking to find the tools with which to do what my vision was, and my doctorate was actually getting into research rather than doing the design part, which is what architects are noted for doing. I got into the minutia of materials and methods and looking at innovative techniques that could improve not only the quality of building, but also the cost of building. And that is a common denominator to what I'm looking at today and what my passion is about today. We have problems indeed, but you want to solve that problem in order to pursue the passion. Ultimately, for me, the passion is still affordable housing. It's jobs. It's creating new businesses. And yes, I'm still very much sort of in the mode of helping the poor man, the guy that's trying to pick himself up by bootstraps. And I've been in government service for a good part of my life. Mainly, they didn't pay a whole lot, but I ended up being put into some great positions where I managed large projects. But that gave me exposure to the codes and the regulations and the politics that are involved in the process of doing big projects, the money and all of these other things.
Okay, to my right, I have a gentleman who is a possessor of a Juris Doctorate. For the layman, that means he's an attorney. And I want to welcome to the show Mainek D'Attaray. Did I get close enough to it?
You got it. Yeah, very good.
So how did you end up in the legal profession?
I started out after I finished my college education working for the city government.
You went to UCLA and then to the University of
correct.
Colorado, where you got your
law degree.
Uh-huh.
Correct. But there was a 6 or 7 year period between getting my bachelor's and when I went to law school. And in those 6 or 7 years, I worked for the city government. And so one of the things that we did regularly in city government when you're in a management capacity is work with legal counsel. And so that sort of solidified my childhood ambition of becoming a lawyer. And I went off to law school 6 or 7 years after undergrad.
We're here today primarily because of a visionary man by the name of Wayne Fishback. That's our common denominator, if you will. Wayne Fishback is a highly successful architect, urban planner, visionary. And the three of us have different relationships with Wayne. Wayne has become a fixture in South Central L.A. He has a number of projects that he's invested time and treasure in, and in the process of dealing with the many challenges that he's faced, he has enlisted the support of you in terms of your expertise as well as yours. So if you would please give the audience a background as to the implications of having met Wayne and the work that he is doing in South Central L.A. as it pertains to his property about 50 miles from here out in the outer reaches of Los Angeles County.
Well, to begin with, I am a professor, a teacher at Cal State Long Beach in the School of Engineering, and I teach construction engineering management, and I also get students engaged in research. So I've continued to be involved in research at the academic level. Also, I've been working professionally in consulting, and Wayne had an acquaintance, and he went to that acquaintance to ask for some help, and that acquaintance said, "You've got to talk to John Bollinger."
Now, who is this acquaintance in the Witness Protection Program?
He's not only a friend, but a great mentor. He's a cost estimator, one of the best in the business. And his name is Iskander Abdullah. And I've known him for almost 30 years, and he's worked with me on a wide variety of projects, big projects. And so when Wayne came to him and said, I need somebody that can do some research on, and he was talking generally about it, he said, well, I know the guy who's going to help you with that. And that was the beginning. So Wayne kind of pointed me in a number of directions. He'd been working on, he'd had some significant challenges in being able to do business, some innovative things that he wanted to do, particularly the recycling and reuse of construction materials, which was a big part of what he's doing now. And he had all these obstacles. And where were the obstacles? A lot of them were in government. And he needed someone that could speak the language, you might say, because he had a lot of frustration and anger, you might say, at what was being done to him. And so, having worked in the public sector a lot, I put on my government hat and I started doing research and opened some doors and asking questions about why there were these or those obstacles going on. That led me to look at codes and standards and local, state, and federal laws, and then to start doing research on what is actually happening with recycling. And this was a learning experience for me. I didn't go in this knowing what it was. Wayne had described what it was. I was going to get into it and prove factually what was going on. And so that's what I did. And there were a variety of things that I did before I go into detail. One had to do with the recycling of inert construction materials. That was what I found was it was being misclassified and misrepresented as to being reused when in fact it was being dumped. And then there was also the research on soil. A lot of public and private projects in this region require excavation of soil and taking soil to other locations. Well, state law now mandates that you take this soil and reuse it in some fashion. So I looked at, well, okay, so how are they reusing the soil that's coming out? And what I found out is they were paying lip service to it. They were taking it to an intermediate location, and they called that location reuse and recycling. From that location, it went to a dump site. Mm-hmm. And in the end, there was no change. But if you looked at the paperwork, it looked like there was a change going on. And I've seen the same thing going on in other areas. Wayne is getting involved now with affordable housing and housing for homeless. And we see a lot of the same types of things going on, code requirements and so forth that are inhibiting the possibilities for doing affordable housing. And as you know, one of the latest things that I'm working on is a proposal for a mixed-use development, a major mixed-use development including 500 houses in the Crenshaw Exposition intersection area, which is sponsored by Metro and the County of Los Angeles. And I'm finding again that what's happening is there's de facto segregation that's going on there in the sense that they're taking an outside developer, they're discriminating against the local community, whether you call the community minority or just local community. They're bringing people in from the outside to do projects which are supposed to be for the benefit of the community when there are those resources already available within the community itself. And that's just scratching the surface on the variety of types of things that are going on that Wayne and some other people that I'm dealing with are discovering. They're seeing these barriers put up by legislation, by codes, and by politicians.
Let me ask you, how much did the legendary Buckminster Fuller have upon your mindset and approach to problem solving within the construct of the profession of engineering, architecture, and development?
Well, let me say he was a mentor of mine. I did some of the advanced studies for a book of his called Synergetics, which seems, if I give you the title, it's kind of abstract. It's minimum surface, maximum volume, close packing of spheres. What it is,
that's way over.
What it is efficient. How to take material and make use of it in the most efficient way.
Okay, there we go.
And of course, he's the father of the geodesic dome, which is a very efficient structure, can close a lot of space. But the most important thing is he opened up my mind to the possibilities of innovation and discovery, looking at the resources that are around us. Most of us are too much in our heads. And what you have to realize, and this is what he's talking about, is you have to understand what resources are right there in front of you, what you can grasp, what you can bring to bear in the moment. That's really all that's there. So if the research leads you to identifying those resources, then you can begin to use them in effective ways. And a good example of that is the way Wayne has identified that there are millions of tons of concrete that are there, that are being disposed of every year. And they can be recycled. There are ways in which you can reuse that material, generating millions of dollars for communities. And there are other kinds of technologies that I can get into. I'm not going to go into all of them. But the key point about Buckminster Fuller is he opened my eyes to looking at resources that are right there and innovating with those resources.
We're going to come back to the concept of innovation in a minute. As I had an opportunity to speak with you earlier, you had aspired at one time to be an urban planner. How does that assist you in working with a visionary, a maverick, and in some instances a rebel like Wayne Fishback?
Well, it's perfect training or perfect ambition for a client like Wayne. Wayne Fishback and I met some 2.5 odd years ago. He came to me because he was facing actions by the county
of Los Angeles,
as it pertains to his acres and acres of private land out in northern LA County. And what he was trying to do at the time was basically create agricultural, arable land. His property zoned for A2 heavy agriculture. He wanted to make an organic farm, a farm that was productive and would give him economic benefit, and would vitalize sort of the principles that the state, the county, everyone sort of espouses. But as we just heard, they never come to fruition. They want to talk about recycling, reuse of materials, things that are already in the economic stream. When projects get demolished, for example, like swimming pools, they have concrete that they're created with, or a building gets demolished. That's clean concrete that was used to create those buildings. They get dumped in quarries out in Irwindale or other parts of the county or state, and they have no economic benefit when they're disposed of. They just go to a receptacle, like a trash bin in the earth, and they rot there. Mm-hmm. Well, Wayne's an innovator because of his architectural background. He was able to see a use for this material as construction material. And the funny thing is, since I've been working with Wayne on his cases, I've seen the same material now. If you go to like larger nurseries, you'll see broken concrete, crushed concrete being sold on pallets to landscapers. Mm. So, what he's was basically doing, and he's been doing, is shifting the paradigm, creating this innovative sort of use and market for these materials that would normally be disposed of. Now they have value. Now they have some type of ability to be incorporated into construction and construction projects to create value in prior, desolate and barren lands. A lot of LA County is dry desert type, topography. When we get rains, we get flash flooding. We get all types of mudslides in the local hills. Mm-hmm. He's discovered or created innovative ways of preventing these types of things from happening on his property, and he's taken that same approach to innovation and brought it here to South Los Angeles. He's creating new markets and opportunities for the local residents here to do small scale construction projects on their own private property, to do landscaping, things where instead of you having to go acquire these materials by putting money out of your own pocket, they'll pay you to take the material and you use it, and you add value to your property, and you're getting paid to do it.
So, John, let me ask you this question and hold your thought. For people who live in urban environments like myself here in South Central Los Angeles, what does all of this mean? The conversation that we're having now to the quality of life, economic opportunities, and social interaction.
Well, it means a lot. If I just focus on the affordable housing part of it, it's very significant. It means you can recycle materials, making the cost of materials less expensive. The innovation allows you to make more with less. In that sense, reducing cost of materials. There are technologies that are being used now to create housing for homeless and others. For example, containers. The container industry was created by the shipping industry. And there's now a big surplus of containers, and they can be bought at a fraction of the original cost and very competitive with conventional housing. So there's a trend to create housing using containers, both for and I'm focusing on affordable housing in this case. And what Wayne has been doing is doing some pilot projects to demonstrate what can be done with the use of containers, with the use of recycled materials, and that demonstration is intended to show also how you can work with the codes and avoid some of these pitfalls that prevent someone from building a home or using some of these recycled materials. I think there's a lot of other things that I can refer to. The idea of, and we're talking about affordability now. Mm-hmm. Affordability of land means you have to use land more efficiently, more intensification of the use of land. So being able to stack containers, for example, to create more units within the same amount of space is one way you can reduce. Another way, I've already mentioned use of containers. Containers are produced in factories. A lot of the construction that's being done today is still what they call stick-built, built by hand on site. Yes, it does create jobs, but compared to the amount of housing that could be produced and even the amount of jobs that could be created at a higher pay scale in factories, I think you're missing opportunities. Other parts of the world, I'm talking about Europe and Asia and Russia and China, are accelerating their development of housing systems that are prefabricated, so-called. And I think we need to look at those and use those as means of developing affordable housing. We're still talking affordable housing, but producing the same housing as it's always been produced. We need to look at a different paradigm for producing the housing, for recycling material, and also how labor is created and how you can create jobs.
Well, there's an old phrase in my neck of the woods: urban renewal means Negro removal. How do we balance the organic changes in populations? Over time, people move out, then people move in. How do we create a balance, if you will, between inevitable growth and the existing population in areas that were once dormant that become popular places to live and work?
Well, I've actually been consulting for some of the business groups in Leimert Park about redoing the plan for the area around the park, and they are studying what has been done in other areas with minority communities where you create collaborations. So one of the solutions to this is to create business, in effect, within the community that can develop and grow and expand. Of course, there needs to be a focus on culture and art, which is one of the key things that defines a community, and history, and those three things need to be part of the overall planning. But most importantly, it has to come from within. If there are not the financial resources or the technical resources from within, they should be brought in a collaboration with the community rather than making the community an afterthought, coming in with a developer that has a preconceived plan and then superimposing it in the community. That is going to be counterproductive for retaining community identity.
Can I touch on that just a little bit before you jump on another topic? You know, as a layperson in that subject area, but as an advocate and an attorney in other capacities, having worked with people trying to stave off development or government overreach, a lot of what I see is that, the people that are the most marginalized are the people with the least amount of economic investment in the community. They may have cultural and social investment in the community because they're from there, they've been raised there, but it's because they don't have the investment in equity in their properties.
That's true.
Or they're not owners, they're renters. It's easy to displace them. I'll use just anecdotally something that I just read in the newspaper the other day. The fires that devastated Santa Rosa, California, for example. A lot of the people that were living up there because of the already inflated property values were renters. Now they can't go back. Because rents have skyrocketed because of demand for housing, because 8,000 or so odd houses burnt. And I may be off on my figures. But because of the acute housing shortage, they've been displaced. Now they want to come back to the community because they have jobs. They have other investments. There's social, cultural investments in the community. But they can't. There's a barrier, the economic barrier. And that's, I think, very significant, too. When we talk about gentrification or the superimposition of this master plan on a community, there would be tools within the community to fight this type of superimposition or imposition period. If there was that economic sort of strength there, and you can probably touch on that better than I can, but that's just my observation as someone who's...
For eons, that has been a problem. I think we have the potential for a solution in bringing these, you can call them classrooms or research facilities or whatever, that do this. They educate people. They engage them in innovation as participants, as collaborators, and ultimately they get a stake in the development of new technologies, new methods. We're looking at, I'm working with a number of organizations, Los Angeles Clean Technology Innovation Campus, Cal State Long Beach. There are these business incubators that will take startup companies, bring them in and fund some initial research. Sometimes they'll bring in students to work with them. And I can see, and in fact, I'm working with LA Trade Tech, the architectural studio, and Marcella Oliva is heading that up, where she reaches out into the community. People come in with issues and questions of how they want to improve their communities, and you're engaging students in coming up with some of the solutions. What I'm saying is the real value is the intellectual value, the social value. If you can tap into the intellectual and social value of people, and sometimes it takes often it takes education, particularly if you're poor and a minority. You're going to school, but you're not being given certain tools to think broadly. The point that I made about Buckminster Fuller is he opened my mind to looking at things. One of the things I do with my students in my senior class is I say, look around at what they're doing. You know, there are these 17 goals for sustainability that the UN and several nations have enacted to meet the goals of sustainability in the world. And so I have my students take a look at that, and particularly since they're engineers, look at what's being done in our region that either is for or against the development and meeting that goal of establishing sustainable technologies in development, their social issues and others. And they go out there and they're like journalists. Initially, they're not inventors. They're just looking out there to see what's going on. And sometimes they discover something really amazing. For example, some of my students asked the question. They said, "What is being done to recycle concrete from freeways?" These are students that asked the question. So we introduced them to Caltrans and to Metro, and they were able to see what was actually going on with there. They were exposed to those technologies. Some of them came from other parts of the world, and they said, we can use that where we live, too. My point is, you open people's minds up. Now that we've got the Internet of everything, you can basically, if you teach people how to use that properly, they can discover all kinds of resources that can be used within communities all the time.
I want to, before we go to break, interject something. Here in the state of California, a couple of weeks ago, a gas tax was implemented, 13 cents if I'm correct. And I passed by a couple of gas stations today, and I said, I should have bought gas 2 weeks ago because it's creeping up. And what I want people to understand is these dollars that are being collected to go probably in the General Revenue Fund, that's our money. And based on the conversation we're having today, I think it's imperative that we begin to follow the money and make sure that many of the uses of that money are applicable to our everyday lives. And early on, we talked, independent of the show today, about the fact that from a legal perspective, there are impediments to services filtering down to the people at the bottom. And you touched on the fact that there are some disclaimers that you would have to share with my audience, and I guess this would be a good time to put that out there.
Sure. I mean, look, I'm an attorney. I'm a licensed California attorney, and so when I make statements, sometimes people will, if they're uninitiated or unsophisticated, they'll think it's legal advice. It's nothing that I'm saying is legal advice. They're strictly my opinions. There's no attorney-client relationship that's formed by me being on this show with any of your audience members. That's just something that I think I should just put out there. Having said that, yes, we were having a discussion, and some of the impediments I was talking about, more so than anything specific, just broadly, is that we have this administrative state that's run amok. You know, there's this overregulation of everything, and when you talk about tax dollars, following tax dollars, you know, there's a lot of tax dollars out there that are being used and spent in different ways, and for the most part, we don't know. It's not transparent where these dollars are going, because a lot of it is, straight from the general fund, and it's commingled. It's not really earmarked for any specific project, but yet and still there's ways that politicians have of grabbing that money and using it for projects, pet projects, what have you. But as the individual citizen, there's laws on the books that you can access to get tax dollars to improve your house, for example. Oftentimes the city will have funds to do some maintenance on your house. A lot of this stuff goes unclaimed because it's just not advertised. There's no budget for advertising, and the onus is on the individual citizen to go out there and find out. Now, I just use that as an example, but you can take that same principle and look at any area of the government, and there's these programs, laws that are on the books that are basically impediments and obstructions to people accessing their full rights as citizens, and including possibly getting money from the government to do beneficial things.
So I want to add to that. I'm also working with a group called Global Business Incubation. You may have heard of
familiar
it.
with, yeah.
And some of the people there are constantly looking at grants and funds at local, state, and federal level for different innovative projects. And the idea that I mentioned about community incubators, if you connect the dots between the advice, it's not just advice in doing innovation, it's advice in getting funding, it's advice in marketing, it's advice in production. It is using whatever resources are available. For example, I mentioned Lacey and Cal State Long Beach. They each have separate resources. I introduced them to each other, and now they're talking about sharing resources. If you do this on a regional basis, and I'm talking community, bottom line is not having this in a central location where it's inaccessible to anybody. I'm talking about creating these in local communities where you can develop whether you call it a classroom or a research laboratory, and they're connected. They're not isolated. This is a trend, and it's a trend that allows more access to resources, not only money, but technology resources that are necessary to develop things.
When we come back from a very short break, I want to spin off on something that you said in one of our separate conversations about having, once engaged in this process and journey with Wayne, you have altered your view to an extent in terms of how you perceive government and bureaucracy and arcane codes and laws and whatnot, and how that applies to bringing people into an awareness that allows them to better understand and take decisive actions to protect their personal interests in how our money is spent from a governmental standpoint. So we'll be right back in a couple of minutes. We're back with John Bollinger and
Mainek D'Attaray.
Mainek. I got it right the first time, D'Attaray. And we're talking about our social, economic, and environmental concerns as it pertains to our built environment, but also what is it that we can do as everyday people to affect change in the way our money is used to either support the advancement of our humanity or deal with the consequences of the benign neglect and abuse that's been going on for so long that we are quickly reaching a point of no return. If people don't become more knowledgeable and involved in what's going on in their respective environments, particularly the people who live in urban centers like Los Angeles. So, John, I'd like for you to take off on what are the implications of the just unprecedented development that's going on in the greater Los Angeles area, and keep in mind that we have yet to experience the infusion of probably billions of dollars for infrastructural development, but here in L.A., there was monies already allocated that are reflected in the transit system that we have here in Los Angeles. So if you would speak to what is going on and what we can do as everyday people to experience some of the benefits of the rail systems that are being built throughout Los Angeles County.
Very good. First of all, you mentioned you need to follow the money. And indeed, we have Measure M, which has allotted for like $40 billion, billions of dollars to the transit system development throughout Southern California. And we have some projects that are going on now. And just to as an introduction, I worked for Metro for over 10 years. I was their manager of real estate development. I was the project manager on the Gateway Transit Center, a $400 million project. I have a lot of friends there. I want to be clear in what I'm saying is that there are a lot of good people at Metro that are well-intentioned and doing a great job. So having said that, there are huge amount of opportunities for minority communities and for small businesses and also for large businesses as well in this project. And part of the study that I'm doing is actually looking at who is getting some of these projects and how many of them are actually minorities and small businesses and et cetera. I have to tell you that what I'm coming up with is not the best picture, and there may be reasons for that. But let me focus on some projects in particular. One of the big projects that's going on right now is the extension of the Purple Line down Wilshire Boulevard. That's a multi-billion-dollar project. I mentioned earlier one of the issues that we identified in recycling materials was the recycling of excavated soil. So you're building a tunnel. So there's a huge amount of soil that's coming out of that tunnel. So we wanted to find out what's happening with that soil. And what we found out is that we contacted Metro. We got a copy of their specifications, which specify where soil is supposed to go and what are the steps or provisions to authorize or certify the distribution. On one hand, we found that there was some flexibility on where it should go. On the other hand, we found they identified certain key sites where it would go, and some of those sites ultimately ended up being transitional sites, and the final site was the site in Irwindale,
which is just a dump, basically.
Well, here's the way language gets distorted. For years now, they've been throwing. It's a quarry, and they've excavated the quarry down to the bottom. Now they're filling it up with soil. Now, according to state mandate, you're supposed to be reusing the soil. So how is that reusing the soil? Well, the city of Irwindale says in 3 or 5 years, when that gets filled up, they plan to make an industrial park out of that. So now you have, by definition, a reuse. But in the meantime, you've got a huge pit that's being filled up. And what's the alternative? All of that soil is going to one or two locations, being operated by companies that aren't hiring more people to do that. It's the same cycle going over. By contrast, there are a lot of projects around the region, and Wayne has some projects, some great ideas about reusing some of that soil. For example, Latuna Canyon was a suggestion that has been devastated. And it is subject to all kinds of flooding when there's rain. Mm-hmm. He has some suggestions for how that soil can be used to renovate that area and to make it better. Mm-hmm. The location, let me put it this way. The Irwindale site is 47 miles away from the location where the excavation is taking place.
On the purple line.
Exactly. That, and I'm just talking about one example. Mm-hmm. Whereas Latuna Canyon, and there are other sites that are closer, is less than half that distance. Mm-hmm. So you have the opportunity to save the cost of transferring things long distances, the energy of
the pollution.
You have also the opportunity to create some new jobs in developing those additional sites. So you've got social benefits, you've got economic benefits, and you've got environmental benefits from diverting that site to reuse in other locations. And that's one example. Now, why is it going to this? If you look at the specifications, there's just a key word in there. Metro doesn't have to follow city or county requirements, which are some of the problems with why a lot of things are being dumped in Irwindale. But it says they will do that consistent with city and county requirements. So all of a sudden they've brought in the city and county requirements into the requirements of their specifications when it was not intended, because the intention is, let me put it another way, the sites I'm talking about are project sites. The site in Irwindale is not really a project site, it's a dump site. Mm-hmm. So Metro is not against shipping that material to project sites, but because of the way it's defined, it's still going to the dump site.
Let me bring you into this part of the conversation from a legal perspective. What is it that the everyday person needs to know about how that affects not only the quality of their lives, but economic opportunities? The arcane nature of these laws and the inconsistencies between metro, city, federal, state laws. How do we narrow the gap between all of these different policymakers?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, it's really a question of coordination between all the different players at the different levels, right? There's no mechanism for coordination as our system of governance stands today. But even more fundamental than that is that there's inherent in what you just described terrible inefficiencies, right? I mean, you're talking about a county agency or a joint powers authority, the MTA, undertaking a project, having to then possibly deal with another level of bureaucracy or of government, maybe a local municipality and or the state in disposing or in reusing the soil, which they're essentially as
they're not using it.
They're not using it. They're really not reusing it. What they're doing is they're disposing of it, and they're hamstringing potential project sites from obtaining that soil and really using it, reusing it
cost effectively
and efficiently. Because of these layers of ordinances that are inconsistent, there should be a consistent body of law. And there typically is. There's the Green Book, the building standards that the state has promulgated. But there's all these antiquated laws that are still on the books at the municipal and the county level that were effectuated years and years ago when the policy of the state was not reuse and recycle, that are still on the books. and they're being and they're being interpreted by technicians who don't really have any sophistication or training in or aren't updated on what the new policies and regulations are at the state level, and so they're being misinterpreted, not interpreted, but misinterpreted, and used to prevent people, for example, like Mr. Fishback, from doing good work on his property, and private property owners are suffering as a result of it. Now, here's the other issue. As far as these laws are concerned, most of these, the way our system of government works, or a system of laws work, is that there's laws on the books, but you don't understand how those laws are to be interpreted or implemented until they've been challenged in a trial in court, and then taken up for review to the appellate level and or the Supreme Court, meaning the state Supreme Court, as it were, in California. That's where we get some type of direction or guidance from a judicial body that reviews basically the statute, the words in the statute, and how they should be implemented. But it's very narrow usually, because it's focused on whatever issue was plaguing the litigant at the trial court level. And so they only make narrow decisions, and that's their job. But most of these sort of administrative codes and these codes that we have, regulatory codes that we have, and there's so many of them at various levels, they don't get challenged, because most property owners that are affected by them don't have the resources or the sophistication to know what to do. They just sort of acquiesce when the county comes in.
Well, let me add something to that, which is important, is that funding for projects, metro projects like the Purple Line, is partly coming from the state and the federal government. That's a fact.
That's right.
Part of the funding. Whenever funding comes from the state and federal government, it comes with those strings that you have to follow state and federal law. And state law right now is mandating 100% recycling.
Right.
Okay. And the city is not doing it. Okay. And the county is not doing it. And other city. Let me just make this point. We have met with other city officials around. You've got 88 cities around the region. A lot of the city officials around the region are not up to snuff on what they have to meet in terms of state mandated requirements. They're looking for guidance. They actually are looking for guidance. And I think it's about time that that guidance be provided, because if it's not, there's going to be penalties in time.
Okay, two quick points, because we have just a few minutes left for this particular show, and it's so important to the city of Los Angeles and to the nation that we get some kind of movement towards greater equity on these projects and greater efficiency. I want to know, give me a ballpark figure. What is this costing the taxpayers of the city and state of Los Angeles because of these inefficiencies? Just give me a ballpark figure.
I can't even begin to imagine. That's something I don't really
I think
analyze.
You have to look at what are the costs that we're talking about. There are jobs that are being missed. There are a lot of opportunities for development in communities that are the money is being siphoned out of the communities to other areas. How much that is huge. When you look at what percentage.
So are we talking millions or billions?
Well,
true economic costs, as Mr. Bollinger is saying, is like not only the actual sort of the missed opportunity of
add them all up. Is it
bringing the resource into the community, but also the consequential costs. The sort of incidental costs,
the opportunities.
Opportunities.
Let me put it this way. We've heard $40 billion with Measure M, but there's probably about 200. Don't just think about public projects here. There's probably $200 billion in private projects going on yearly,
built up around these,
and a lot of that is coming in. The money is coming in from outside this area. It's national. It's international. And I like to say it this way: you got to put the bucket there to capture some of it.
I got
and we had an idea for a World's Fair where you would be distributed throughout the region, including communities that need. So you would have a campus, a World Fair campus in Watts, for example, that would attract business from around the world to Watts. So you could develop housing, you could develop retail, you could develop parks, and all these things would come to the community. That's what I call the bucket, is you distribute it around the region so everybody benefits, and not just one central location.
So how do we use the Purple Line as a model of possibility, if you will? There's an event coming up Thursday that I'd like for you to share with the audience that would give the listeners and people that they may know outside of the folks who listen to this show outside of Los Angeles, may know people who live in the greater Los Angeles area. Give them a reason to come to the meeting on Thursday of the Board of Directors for Metro.
Very good. So there's been a procurement of a joint developer for a major project at the intersection of Exposition and Crenshaw, on two corners of Exposition and Crenshaw. A total of maybe 500 housing units, most of which is affordable. You have other kinds of uses. And so a number of developers, 4 developers, I believe, have proposed projects in that area. 2 of the developers have what I call roots in the community, meaning they're connected to churches, they're connected to the malls in the area. They have investments in the community. They know the community. They've been interacting and relating with the community. And a couple of developers came in from outside the area and made proposals. Now, those proposals, according to the Metro staff, were very close. They were very close in terms of the design, what they were offering to the community. But one of the things that they did not consider in the evaluation was the investment and the commitment that already pre-existed within the community. They discounted that completely. What happened? They selected a developer from outside the area, a big developer, old-time developer, has been around for many years, is very well financed, has a lot of expertise. Nothing wrong with that developer other than they're coming in from outside. Why? Because the developers that already have investments in the community have not been weighted. There is no special consideration. And there's a provision of the law called Proposition 209 that says you can't favor minorities. Now, that means minorities, and this is a minority community, but it's the community that needs to be focused on, whether it's minority or not. It's what's going on economically, socially, environmentally within the community. The proposal from the staff is once the developer is selected, they can go ahead and establish those relationships. Well, is that reasonable? Is that fair? So coming up on Thursday, there's a hearing before the executive management committee of the Board of Metro to hear the recommendations of staff on which developer to select. And I'm simply saying this is the time for the community to stand up and say, we have not been considered. Metro, throughout the process, before the evaluation process, said, we're going into the community. We're going to find out what the community wants. We're going to consider culture, history, or the social needs of the community. Then it came to the evaluation. Those things were not weighted in making the selection. Now they're going to reinvent it after the developer is selected. Does that make sense? It's time for the community to stand up and talk.
So what time and where is this gathering?
So the gathering is at the Metropolitan Transit Authority headquarters in the boardroom, which is on the 3rd floor of the Metro building. It will take place on Thursday at 11:30 a.m. And we expect.
What's the address?
It's called One Gateway Center. It is located at Union Station on the east side of Union Station. And you can find it on
the perimeter of downtown Los Angeles, correct?
Yeah, it's where the trains come in.
The trains come in. Now, the reason this is important, I mean, you can either curse the darkness or turn on the light. This is an opportunity, and if we're successful, and we must be successful in raising these issues before we lose yet another opportunity to enrich the local citizens of Los Angeles. It's imperative that as many people that can get to that meeting show up. Your physical presence makes a tremendous difference, because the biggest heist of all time happened in the daylight and in meetings such as these, because we're talking about how many millions of dollars just in that little stretch of the Purple Line.
It's probably $200-300 million.
$200 or $300 million.
And that's not the actual train station facility.
That's the development around.
That's the development around.
Okay, all right. These are the kind of moves that we need to make. Please do not get distracted with all of the other things that seem to capture our attention as everyday people, and it has nothing to do with whether you eat or not. This is about who gets to eat off of the money that you pour into the coffers every time you pay a gas tax or a sales tax. Forget the fact that you may not own property. You have still become vested with the money that you pour into the economy via taxation without fair representation. I want to thank you, John, for coming out, and we're going to continue to bring segments such as these. Matter of fact, I'm going to do a couple of special podcasts about this to give people more remedies for what's going wrong in our society from a legal perspective as well as a built environment perspective. So I want to thank you again for coming out and participating in this evening's show. The reason, again, that this is important, we have an opportunity to finally recognize that there are resources within our midst, because this panel tonight is a reflection of what L.A. looks like, and in many instances, what America is looking like. And I really want to commend you for having, for the last 40 years, used your talent and your expertise to bring about change in the lives of people who otherwise would suffer from the lack of knowledge, and your activism is very important as we look at how do we fit into this ever-changing environment. And I say the same, I haven't known you that long, but again, we have this common kinship with Brother Fishback, and what we want to do is create a model of possibility and then have that replicated not only in the greater Los Angeles area, but throughout this place we call these United States of America. And before I close, a dear friend of mine who is a pillar of the Leimert Park community, the legendary jazz vocalist Barbara Morrison, is having a fundraiser this Friday night at 3339 West 43rd Street, which is a legendary facility. Many of the comedians that we've grown to love, like Robin Harris and Martin Lawrence and all those guys, they cut their teeth at the Regency West. It's going to be utilized for a fundraiser for the California Jazz and Blues Museum. And she has enlisted the talents of a legendary performer by the name of Kevin Mahogany, and he, along with Barbara, will do a musical tribute to Big Joe Williams and the legendary Ella Fitzgerald. That's going to be Friday night at the Regency West, 8 p.m. If you're in the greater Los Angeles area, come out and support this sister, because she has two facilities, the Barbara Morrison Performing Arts Center and the California Jazz and Blues Museum. And these are the kind of things that you're talking about, maintaining and preserving the culture of a community. And Barbara has poured her heart and soul into preservation of the music and the people who get an opportunity to experience the beauty and joy of live musical performances. So as we conclude the show this evening, again, I want to thank both of my guests, and we're going to do a couple of special podcasts that gives people an understanding how you can apply what it is that we're in the process of doing here in the greater Los Angeles area across the country. So as we close out, I'd like to thank Portis, who always does a marvelous job, giving me a platform to just partake information that you can use in your everyday life. So thank you for letting me be myself yet again. And we'll see you next week.